We are standing here in actually the southernmost tip of Mumbai, which is a kind of back bay. And what you see in front of you here with the water is an unfinished landfill from the 1960s. That area at the back there is called Nariman Point. And Mr. Nariman was the mayor of the city, and he brought a stop to the landfill because he exposed a scam in the reclamation company. And so the point the reclamation stopped was called Nariman Point, and that's why that zone is called Nariman Point. But what's very interesting is Nariman Point is real estate, which is it's the same as Manhattan in terms of price. And then on your other side, diametrically opposite, is housing, which is for the rich. It's the highest real estate in the country. And what's amazing is this kind of socialist looking housing houses India's biggest capitalists. And it's decrepit, it's in bad shape, and I think it's the most expensive slum in the world. But how it's linked to what I'm going to talk to you about is interesting, because it's the money that recycles the interior renovations in those houses is the rubble that starts making the landfill, and these become incremental and slow landfill accretions to make more land. But what's even more interesting is housed in the bay, the center of these sort of two conflicting points, are the fishermen's village, which has now expanded itself also as a slum. But where you see the boats in the background are the fishermen. They're the coolies, they're the original inhabitants of the island. They used to be on the eastern side of the island, but when they developed the docks there, they were relocated here way before any of this reclamation was made. So they're the original settlers. And it's ironic now they're trapped between two sort of diametrical opposite sort of poles here. One is residential, one is commercial, and also that commands such high real estate. Bombay was 7 islands, and for thousands of years on these islands they were fishermen, exactly like what you see. Their boats were not different from what you see here. And then it was much later, only 300 years ago, that Bombay was an accident. The Portuguese owned it and had reclaimed it. And in a dowry gift for Catherine the Braganza's wedding, it went to the British as part of the dowry. And the British anyway took it over, and they worked with it and of course turned it into something completely different. And the fishermen were always accommodated in this sort of equation. So they have actually the right, and one of the problems of even thinking about any land infill here is how do you give access to the fishermen, because they have that as a right to be able to access the high sea. And so that's why it becomes even a more interesting design problem. Would you relocate them to the edge of the city then? Fascinating. Part of the waterfront is a live waterfront. Or would you create a series of channels? I don't know. I mean, it's a physical design problem, but a fascinating one. But there are, I think, 7 or 8 villages like this across the metropolitan area that yet exist, that were on the original Seville Islands. So it's the umbilical cord that links Mumbai back to a much more ancient history. This bay for me epitomizes the condition of the city, and I think as designers, if we can resolve these kinds of contestations in urban space, I think this is a lesson that the whole city can learn from, and many paradigms can evolve from this globally too. Because when we say maximum city, as it's described often, this is as far as the contestation can go in terms of extremes, and I think that's really fascinating. So when we refer to kinetic city and the kind of temporal sense of the city, I think it's in 2 frames. There are small rhythms where sidewalks change and hawkers come and people come and go, and there's a kind of kineticism there. But then there is a kind of long range, long rhythm, which is of time, and that also is kinetic. And so just to sort of recap, I can't but help stand here and think about the past, the last 30 or 40 years, and the buildings that you see there which overlook the bay were originally very elegant bungalow apartments. And when my family moved from Pakistan after the partition as refugees, they acquired a small apartment there. And I grew up coming to this waterfront, and where you see these houses, which is what we call a slum now, was a very beautiful beach. And there were elegant cast iron benches along this beach, and I played there with my grandfather, and we swam, and we went back and had a meal, and that was my memory of visiting my grandparents and growing up here. Maybe a decade later, my parents acquired an apartment further down that road, and that was in the 70s. And I witnessed this entire zone being reclaimed at that point. The only house that used to exist here was a shack of an illicit alcohol brewer. And he was very friendly with us kids because he didn't want us to squeal on him, and would give us water while we were playing just to sort of replenish us, not the alcohol. We kept away from it. But this sort of expanse of land was, like as big as Central Park, and it was just ours. We were about 20 kids who lived in these little apartments who played here. And it was absolutely amazing. And then I went away in the late 70s and to Ahmedabad to study architecture, went and studied, got my master's. And 15 years later, I came back and there were these apartment buildings. This place was sort of full of apartment buildings. So I think what's mind-boggling is that to think that our generation, people who were born in the early 60s, in the 40 years or 50 years we've been alive, this is mind-boggling transformation in the city. And I think in human history there haven't been such shifts, both in demography and therefore the physical form of the city. And again, I think the zone that we see here epitomizes that flux. And that's another kind of kinetic kind of quality of the city where it changes, but in a kind of different time rhythm. And every 3 years I come back here and I see the landfill increasing. As more people renovate their bathrooms and kitchens and bedrooms, they dump stuff here. More people come and acquire land, buy into the slum system. So these are two forms of, I suppose, informality playing themselves out together. So when it's informality of the rich and the poor, is it yet informality, or is that the phenomena? Is that the way the city is made? So, and that's why sort of I use the word kinetic in a desperation to search for another category, because can we just say that everything is informal? Formal goes out of the window. I don't know. And again, I think this sort of zone that we are standing at is one that throws up all those questions, challenges us with all those issues, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. Because on the other hand, you can see this in more formalistic terms, and I think this is probably one of the greatest urban design opportunities in the world waiting for happening. Because, I mean, look at the sea. It's expansive. It has the capital that will drive it. It has the demography that will occupy it. It's just mind-boggling, the fact that it's not happening. One feels a sense of impotency as a designer, planner, and architect operating in the city like this, that one can't put these pieces together to make something wonderful happen out of it, which would improve the lives of people across the board.